Maggie Adams. I'm head of the MGM Home Entertainment Photo Archive, and one of the perks of my job is to be able to access linen books like the one we have from the Magnificent Seven to use for design and advertising collateral. It's rare that we find something in such good condition that goes back that far. We found this linen book in a salt mine in Kansas City. When the MGM offices in New York closed in the early 80s, they sent everything there for preservation: photography, legal documents, and film. This salt mine in Kansas was 650 feet beneath the ground. It was beneath a wheat farm, actually. We wore hard hats, carried oxygen tanks, and, it was a working mine. And so all day long we'd hear blasting and hear the salt being mined. We were like kids on Christmas morning. Every box that we opened seemed to contain some sort of photography, some legal document, something that no one has seen in 40 years. This particular linen book contains photography that's never been seen before. We've got beautiful shots of Steve McQueen, Eli Wallach, Yul Brynner, all of them.
When you see a book like this, the first thing it does is it brings back enormous memories. And every shot, you can remember the day and how you felt and what the people were like and what the laughs were. I think one of the things that comes back the most is to see John Sturgis, who did so love the Western and thought it was such a basic way to tell stories. John Sturgis was a strange phenomenon. I think he was one of the really underrated directors of our time. He understood action better than anybody I've ever known. He really understood what it was about. But some of that had to do with the fact that he was a great believer in let me get a good heavy in the picture, and the rest of it will take care of itself.
I don't know why. I never understood how they picked me. I really don't. I said to John Sturgis, I want to play the crazy samurai. Oh, they said no. He said, no, that's the love interest. I said, oh. He said, I want you to play the head bandit. I said, I come on in the first 2 minutes and then you don't see me. And on the way home, I thought, wait a minute. All they talk about for the next hour is me. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Oh, there I am with my gang. Look at that. See it? I had 34 men with me. And Sturgis said, I want you to get up early, come early with the men, and go riding for an hour. And we used to go hoop, hoop with our horses, They were all great horsemen. And all of them had guns, real guns. And there was one man there named El Indio, Emilio Fernandez. He would direct movies, but he didn't like a review that somebody gave him and shot him in the balls. So they banned him for a year, but they let him work on this movie. He said to me, I have to get you a hat. We go to Mexico City, and they take the measurements. And now he says, now we celebrate. We go and have tequila, we have a good time. I don't remember the rest of that whole night, but the next day, I come back, and there's my hat. And I said, I can't wear that hat. It's as big as a cocktail table. It was, I'm not kidding, it was this big. I said, if I get on the horse and it rides fast, I'll blow away. Then I thought to myself, wait a minute. All I have to do is push that black hat on the back of my head, and the whole screen goes black except for my little face. So I said, great. We get back to Sturgis. He said to the prop man, where's the hat? He looks at it, he says, bring out the scissors. And they cut it down to this size.
There was a competitiveness throughout the picture among the seven, but not in a mean way. I've heard stories about how they were always rivalries that were dangerous, and that's not so. John had a masterful way of handling people and making them think that they weren't being handled, but typical of a concern over what's going to happen when you have seven guys struggling like that. I should say six and Yule. He kind of kept himself out of the picture.
Don't be fools! You'll turn our village into a graveyard. Tell them to go. It's the only thing for them to do.
I'll tell you what I can do. I can kill the first man who so much as whispers a word about giving up. The very first man, so help me, I'll blow his head off.
Yul Brynner had a tremendous presence every place he went. I think he played the king and I, whatever role you put him in, including the Magnificent Seven. And the walk is rather distinctive. That's the king. He really was one of the last Hollywood stars.
You knew when he was on screen. You knew he was that powerful in a sense that you thought, oh, I understand him and I understand what he's doing. Don't forget, he has a slight accent. And you have to accept him as an American gringo gunman.
Say, what's your name?
Make it Vin. What's yours?
Chris.
There was a competition between Steve McQueen and Yul Brynner. Steve would watch Yul. There's a scene where they're getting on a hearse to take a body to the cemetery. And Yul is up there, very, very much in charge. And McQueen would take the shells from a rifle and go like this. And Yul would look at him and say, what the hell are you doing? Each one was competing with the other. The trick with Steve is that he was a skillful listener. And that's one of the biggest things you should do while you're making a film, to really listen. And Steve at one point said to John Sturges, can you cut some of my long speeches? I don't want to. I'd rather just listen, because that enhances the character. So I thought, that's a wise guy. And he was in the actor's studio, too.
Steve was naturally very coordinated. He didn't know anything about athletics, but he would have made a great defensive back because he was quick and he could move very fast. He had just natural instincts. It wasn't so much athleticism as it was coordination. And he had a lot of ways to pull a gun out. It was very stylish.
Riding a horse, he was extremely skillful with a horse. I thought, where did he's from Chicago or wherever he was from. How the hell did they learn all these tricks?
We shot in Tepoztlan, but we lived in Cuernavaca, which was like a 30-minute drive or something. And Cuernavaca was small at that time. Now it's a big metropolis. But they had a beautiful hotel called Posada Jacaranda. There was no place to go. Everybody just spent time there, and Yul could go play gin with Brad and make a couple of bucks. And Charlie, of course, had to dive off the top of the rocks into the pool, not the diving board. Wonder he didn't get killed, but he had to because there might have been somebody watching, and particularly if the somebody was female, then he had to jump off the rocks. Early on in the picture, groups began to form. There wasn't as much seven-man camaraderie as there was smaller duos and trios.
Bronson and McQueen had a gimmick between them of not saying much. You know, a look from Bronson was really dangerous. Usually he was one man against the enemy, against the people who mistreated others. But the guy I got closest to was Brad Dexter. He knew my wife very well because they did a play together before I ever met him. And he and I would go out a lot together. There's a sweet story about him. He was making a movie with Frank Sinatra. And Sinatra went in the water in a shot and started to drown. And Brad rushed in and grabbed him and pulled him out and saved his life. And Sinatra hired him as the producer of his next movie.
Brad was a very bad gin player. He found a way to get Yul in a gin game and lost considerably. So for the rest of the picture and about the next 3 or 4 of Yul's pictures, Brad was one of the co-stars and was still losing in gin.
Colleen told me what you said, and I say you're wrong. What do you say?
I liked Colburn. The first day I watched him, he sat there with this hat over his eyes, and I thought, where did they find him? When he stood up and walked over and threw his knife and killed a man, I thought, gee.
John was convinced that the way Jimmy moved and everything else, that he was Western. And he could also minimize the dialogue, that Jimmy's motions and looks and the adjustment of the hat and all the standard Western stuff was something that would come to Jimmy naturally. He didn't need long speeches.
That was the greatest shot I've ever seen.
The worst was aiming at the horse.
Horst was a German who, I believe, had made one picture that caught Sturgis's eye. And like Yule, John could imagine him in a Western atmosphere, Western clothes, with a gun, with a horse. And I don't think that Horst was very comfortable with it.
Come on now. And let's see how fast you are. You think I'm just talking, huh?
Horst surprised me with his skill with horses and with weapons. He's a German boy, and how the hell did he learn how to ride like that? He was very good on a horse.
And I think the reason that John cast Robert Vaughn was he felt that this was very difficult to have 7 interesting stories, so they're going to be short stories. And Vaughn was capable of playing what that story was. Kind of simple, but tough for an actor. Here's a guy who was a great gunman. Now he's afraid he's turned into a coward. He hasn't turned into a coward, but in proving it to himself, he gets killed. I've seen some motion pictures that didn't have a story that was that good.
You never know what's behind one of these people and what they specialize in, what they love to do. Robert Vaughn, he wrote a book about the blacklist, which interested me enormously. Yul Brynner was a brilliant photographer, loved to do his work. McQueen was very clever in selecting the work he wanted to do. Brad Dexter saved Sinatra. And Coburn with his knife throwing. I thought it was all wonderful. But seeing these pictures makes me think back to how successful that movie was, The Magnificent Seven. People kept wanting to see it over and over and over again. This book, what it does is refreshes my memory, and it says, I remember getting on the horse that day. I remember him turning around looking at me and thinking, oh, a New York actor. Oh, God. But I feel richer, and I thank you for this.